What would you do if the person you raised called you a traitor? I'm Mackenzie Davis. I'm 34. And last Thursday, I sat in the back row of courtroom 7, watching my sister, the same sister I once fed with a bottle and tucked in every night, being tried for drug trafficking. Nobody recognized me, not the judge, not the journalists, and definitely not my parents sitting near the front with the smug, pious grief of people who'd rehearsed their victimhood. But that's fine. I didn't come here as Governor Davis. I came as the girl who used to sew her sister's Halloween costumes from thrift store fabric. The girl who once burned her hand making mac and cheese at age 7 because no adult in the house cared enough to cook. That courtroom was full of strangers, but I knew every version of the story they'd been told. It was the same story my parents had carefully curated over the years, the one where I'm the selfish sister who left, who abandoned her family for ambition, who turned her back on her responsibilities. They never talked about why I left, or what I left behind. I grew up in Millfield, Michigan. If you blink while driving through, you'll miss it. Our house sat at the edge of town, white siding peeling in places flower boxes under the windows. It looked like the American dream. But walk inside, and it felt like a tomb. My mom, Caroline, was a receptionist at a local dental office. My dad, Richard, bounced between construction gigs. They weren't cruel, but they weren't there. Not really. Mom would come home, pour herself a stiff gin and tonic, and lock her bedroom door. Dad would plant himself in front of the TV surrounded by a fortress of beer cans, the kind of man who only spoke to criticize. At age 7, I started making my own lunches. Simple stuff. Peanut butter sandwiches, soup from a can. I learned not to ask questions, not to need. By 9, I was doing laundry vacuuming, budgeting our grocery runs. Every time I stepped on a stool to stir something on the stove, I prayed I wouldn't fall. If I did, no one would notice. Then when I was 11, everything changed. Mom announced she was pregnant again. She wasn't excited. Neither was Dad, but I was. Hazel was born on a Tuesday in April during the kind of rainstorm that flooded the gutters and made the whole town smell like wet dirt. I remember holding her for the first time, this tiny, squirming bundle with fists like little knots and bright blue eyes. She blinked up at me, and something in my chest cracked open. Nobody told me I'd be raising her, but I knew in that moment I would. I was in 6th grade, but I read every parenting book in the library. I used yard sale money to redecorate the guest room into a nursery. I named her Hazelnut because her cheeks were round and sweet, and she made the same popping sound when she sneezed as a chipmunk in a cartoon. Mom had what I now understand was postpartum depression, though back then we just called it tired. She stayed in bed a lot. Dad stayed at work longer. Hazel cried all night, and no one came except me. So I changed the diapers. I sang the lullabies. I gave up sleep and social life and slumber parties. I would run home from school to feed her before my evening shift at the diner. And you know what? I didn't resent it. Not at first. Hazel gave me purpose. She gave me the one thing I never got growing up: unconditional love. When I was 16, I used my tip money from waitressing to buy her shoes, school supplies, little birthday cakes shaped like bunnies. There was a winter so cold our heater failed. I bought a space heater for her room and told her we were having an Arctic Explorer night complete with flashlight stories under the blankets. She believed me. We'd huddle together laughing at nothing as my fingers went numb. Hazel never saw how scared I was, how tired. She saw someone dependable, strong, happy, the truth. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I can count. I'd press my face into a pillow so she wouldn't hear. My teachers knew something was off, but I lied. Told them my parents were just tired or working late. I became a master deflector. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I couldn't risk being separated from Hazel. I was her safe place, and if anyone knew what was happening in that house, they'd take her away. I couldn't let that happen. By high school, I was juggling AP classes, 2 part-time jobs, and full-time parenting. I wore hand-me-downs and skipped prom, but Hazel had everything she needed. I made sure of it. And then came my shot. The University of Michigan offered me a full scholarship for political science. It was supposed to be our ticket out. I'd build a better life, get a real job, buy a house. Then Hazel could live with me. Really live, not just survive. But that's where it all began to fall apart, because the people who had ignored her as a baby suddenly decided to step in, not to help, but to control. And they used the one thing I loved most against me: Hazel. Leaving Hazel was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I didn't leave her. Not really. I made a plan. A meticulous, agonizing, guilt-laden plan to ensure she'd be safe while I was gone. Every single decision I made in those years was with her in mind. Before I left for college, I sat my parents down at the kitchen table like I was negotiating a hostage situation. "I'll accept the scholarship," I said, "only if you promise to actually parent Hazel." I slid a typed agreement across the table. Basic expectations: meals, check-ins, school involvement. It wasn't legally binding, but it was the best leverage I had. I told them I'd send money home from my campus job, that I'd call every Sunday, that if I found out Hazel was being neglected, I would come back and take legal action. They looked offended, like I had accused them of something. "You're so dramatic," Mom had said. Dad just muttered, "She prefers you anyway. No apology. No accountability. Just a passive admission that they'd rather I keep doing their job." Hazel was 7 when I left, gap-toothed, full of questions, her hair always in pigtails I braided before school. "Why can't I come with you?" she asked, clinging to my leg as I packed. "College is just for big people," I whispered, kneeling beside her. "But this is for us. When I graduate, we'll live together again, just you and me. You promise, I promise, Hazelnut." I gave her a backpack filled with notes labeled for specific days: when you're sad, when you miss me, when you feel alone. I even programmed my number into a prepaid phone I'd bought with my savings. Then I left for Ann Arbor, crying the entire train ride. College life was alien. My roommate complained about her mom calling too often while I waited by the phone every Sunday, hoping Hazel would answer. When she did, it was like breathing again. She'd tell me about her new teacher, about the stray cat she named Marmalade, about her Halloween costume, a robot built out of cereal boxes. But slowly, things changed. By my second year, the calls grew shorter. Her tone was flatter, less excited. When I asked about school, she gave one-word answers. When I asked to speak to our parents, they were busy or not home. Then one Sunday, she didn't pick up at all. I left a voicemail. "Hazel, I miss you. Call me back, okay? Nothing." I threw myself into my studies: public policy and political science. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore. Half my paycheck went home. I didn't go to frat parties. I didn't have a social life. Every choice was part of the plan: graduate, get a good job, bring Hazel to live with me. That dream kept me going. One professor, Dr. Harmon, pulled me aside after class one day. "You have something the others don't," he said. "A fire, a reason. You should consider working in government." I laughed. Me, I'm just trying to survive. But he saw something, and for the first time, I did too. Then came winter break junior year. I took a bus home, 6 hours in freezing weather with a duffel bag and a beating heart. Hazel didn't greet me at the door. She was sitting on the couch, glued to her phone, barely looked up when I entered. "Hey," she mumbled. My chest tightened. "Hey, Hazelnut. I brought your favorite, those raspberry candies." Whatever. That night at dinner, she barely spoke. My parents talked like I was a guest. When I tried to talk to Hazel about moving in with me after graduation, she blinked. "What are you talking about? I'm getting a place with 2 bedrooms, near a school, a park, your own bathroom. Remember? That's been the plan all along." She glanced at our parents, then said flatly, "I'm not going anywhere." Mom put her hand on Hazel's shoulder like she'd rehearsed it. "You can't just disappear for 4 years and expect to uproot her life now, Mackenzie." "Disappear," I snapped. "I've called every week. I've sent money. I came home when I could." "It's not the same as being here," Dad said sharply. That's when it hit me. They'd rewritten the story, and Hazel believed them. In the days that followed, I tried everything. I showed Hazel photos of her room, gave her a tour of my future apartment, offered to adopt a puppy, something our parents had always refused. She shrugged off every gesture, cold, detached. Then finally, during a rare moment alone, she looked me dead in the eyes. "You left because you were tired of taking care of me. You wanted to live a normal life. Without me." I froze. "Hazel, no. I left so I could build a future. For us." She shook her head. "You just didn't want me." Those words, "you didn't want me," still echo sometimes, especially at night. That trip ended in disaster. My parents accused me of interfering. Hazel told me to go back to my perfect life. I drove back to Ann Arbor with swollen eyes and shattered faith. I'd spent years carrying that child, sacrificing for her, loving her. And now, I was the villain. I wish I could say things got better after that visit. They didn't. They got worse. After that cold weekend at home, I threw myself into work with the kind of tunnel vision only heartbreak can create. I buried myself in policy research advocacy public service. Because if I couldn't save my sister, maybe I could save someone else's. But Hazel kept slipping. I started hearing whispers from old neighbors' friends from Millfield. Whispers I desperately hoped weren't true. She's been skipping school. She was caught drinking. She's hanging out with that group, you know the one. At first I brushed it off. Teen rebellion, maybe. Typical small-town exaggeration. But then came the call from Aunt Susan. Mackenzie. Hazel was picked up by the police. She was 16. They found opioids in her locker. I took emergency leave from my job at the Capitol and drove 6 hours in the dark, praying the whole way that this wasn't real, that it was a misunderstanding, that she'd see me walk through the door and everything would reset. I found her curled up in her bedroom, red-eyed, dazed. She didn't look like my sister. She looked like a ghost wearing her skin. "Hazel," I whispered, kneeling beside her. "What's happening to you?" She sat up slowly, her pupils like pinpoints, her skin pale. "You don't get to ask that," she slurred. "Where were you when I needed you? I've been trying to reach you for years," I said, tears choking my voice. "I never stopped." She shook her head, laughing bitterly. "Just go. That's what you're good at." Leaving. That sentence crushed something inside me. I looked to my parents, desperate for support, some kind of shared intervention, but Mom just shrugged. She won't listen to us either. She said, folding laundry like we weren't in the middle of a crisis. This is what happens when a child's abandoned during their formative years. Abandoned. The word hit like a punch to the ribs. They weren't just ignoring the truth anymore. They were rewriting it. In their story, I was the prodigal daughter, the one who chased her own future and left the family in ruins. And Hazel, sweet Hazel, was the collateral damage, the poor girl left behind, the truth. My parents had abdicated responsibility long before I stepped foot on a college campus. I was the one who kept Hazel fed, educated, safe. And now I was being painted as the villain for trying to break the cycle. It was psychological manipulation at its most insidious, and Hazel, caught in the middle, couldn't see the strings being pulled. By the time she turned 18, she had dropped out of high school and was living with a known dealer. I drove down again, heart pounding, knowing this might be my last chance. The apartment complex was a rundown building that smelled like mildew and stale cigarettes. I knocked, and when she opened the door, I barely recognized her. She was thin, dangerously thin. Her arms were marked with what I didn't want to admit were track marks. Her eyes were hollow, sunken. "What do you want?" she asked flatly. "I want to help you," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Please, Hazel, let me get you into a program. We can turn this around." "You don't know me," she snapped. "That's not true," she scoffed. "You haven't known me since I was 7, since the day you left." I called. I wrote. I sent money. I came home. "You didn't stay," she cut in. "And don't blame Mom and Dad. At least they were there." I realized then that there was nothing I could say that would penetrate the version of me she'd built to protect herself. The Mackenzie in her head was the selfish sister who walked away, because that narrative, as warped as it was easier than the truth, because the truth is complicated. The truth is I tried. I tried and tried and tried, and it still wasn't enough. After that confrontation, I drove home to Lansing and wept, not for myself, but for the little girl who used to fall asleep, curled against me clutching her stuffed rabbit. The girl who used to laugh when I made pancakes shaped like stars. That girl was gone, replaced by someone I didn't know anymore. I couldn't force her to accept my help, but I wouldn't give up on her either, so I did the only thing left to do. I set up a bank account in her name, deposited money every month in case she ever changed her mind, and I threw myself harder than ever into my work. I rose quickly in the Department of Health and Human Services. I proposed reforms to the foster care system. I worked 14-hour days drafting legislation to help young caregivers. I became a rising star in the State House. But every time someone praised my compassion or quoted my policies in a debate, all I could think about was Hazel, the sister who believed I didn't love her, the sister who thought I failed her, and maybe in some way, I had. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office at the Capitol reviewing education budget proposals when Rachel, my chief of staff, knocked and entered without waiting for permission. That only happened when it was serious. She had a newspaper in her hand and an unreadable look on her face, part concern, part hesitation. "Governor, there's something you should see." She placed the paper in front of me, folded to a small article in the crime section. Millfield woman arrested in multi-county drug trafficking operation. I didn't need to read further. I saw the mugshot. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, but unmistakably Hazel. I felt the air punch out of my lungs like I'd been kicked in the ribs. According to the article, she'd been arrested while transporting large quantities of heroin and stolen prescription opioids with fraud charges tacked on for using elderly residents' identities to open credit lines. She'd been booked in Lansing, my city, my jurisdiction, and her preliminary hearing was scheduled for next week in Courtroom 7, just 15 minutes from the governor's mansion. "Do you know her?" Rachel asked gently. I nodded. "She's my sister." Rachel sat quietly for a long moment, then asked, "What do you need?" What I needed was impossible. I needed to turn back time, to hug a 5-year-old Hazel and remind her I never stopped loving her, to erase the years she'd spent believing I walked away. Instead, I answered calmly, "I need to attend the trial. No press, no official capacity. Just as Mackenzie." Rachel didn't argue. She understood better than most that some wounds never stopped bleeding. On the morning of the hearing, I wore my most unremarkable outfit, dark slacks, a gray blouse hair pulled back in a bun under a baseball cap, minimal makeup, glasses I rarely wore. I looked like any other woman in the crowd. The courtroom was modest, half filled with local reporters, public defenders, board clerks. I slipped into the back row silent. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure someone could hear it. Then the bailiff brought her in. Hazel, 25 years old, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front of her, her cheekbones so sharp they looked like they might cut skin. Her eyes, once curious and full of light, were dull, distant. She didn't see me. She wasn't looking at anything. Charges were read aloud, possession with intent to distribute, to trafficking across county lines, identity theft, fraud. She entered a not guilty plea with a voice that barely registered. Then my parents entered. They sat near the front, composed and polished like they were attending a charity luncheon. Caroline wore pearls. Richard had a freshly ironed suit. They hadn't changed much, but their expressions, sanctimonious superior, made my stomach turn. When called to testify, my mother dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue, describing Hazel as a troubled but sweet girl led astray by bad influences. We gave her every advantage, she said, but after her sister abandoned us, she began to spiral. There it was. The narrative they'd perfected for years, now under oath in front of a judge. My father chimed in. Mackenzie was like a mother to Hazel, but when she left for college, everything changed. Hazel was devastated. The defense attorney ran with it, framing Hazel's crimes not as a result of poor choices, but as a symptom of early trauma, specifically attachment disruption caused by abandonment. It was surreal, like watching a documentary about your own life, but all the facts are wrong. Hazel just sat there, silent, passive. But when the attorney painted me as the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong, she nodded. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout, "That's not what happened," but I stayed in my seat, frozen. Then something shifted. The judge, Honorable Michael Thornton, glanced around the courtroom, scanning faces as he reviewed his notes. His gaze passed over me, then snapped back. He stared, then adjusted his glasses, and said clearly and deliberately, "Excuse me, but wait, you're the governor." The entire courtroom went still. Papers stopped rustling. Pens froze. Heads turned. Even Hazel lifted her head, her eyes locking onto mine for the first time in years. I stood up slowly, removed my cap, removed the glasses. There was no use hiding now. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I am." The gasp that followed was loud, audible, almost cinematic. One of the reporters dropped his pen. My parents turned around so fast their seats squeaked. My mother's face twisted in horror. Hazel stared, confusion and recognition flashing across her expression. Judge Thornton blinked, trying to recover. "Governor Davis, this is highly irregular. May I ask your interest in these proceedings?" I swallowed. "The defendant is my sister," I said softly. "Hazel Davis." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbling furiously, cameras clicking. Hazel's face went white. My parents, caught in the act, looked like statues. The judge banged his gavel. "Order no photographs in my courtroom." Then he turned to me again. "Governor, are you here in an official capacity?" "No," I said, standing straighter. "I'm here as Mackenzie, her sister, nothing more." He paused, then nodded. "Approach the bench." I walked past my mother, who hissed, "What are you doing?" without breaking stride. This was no longer about politics. This was about truth, about finally shattering the lies that had broken everything between Hazel and me. I stood before the judge's hands clasped tightly to steady the tremble. "I'm not here to interfere," I said quietly. "I only came to observe. I never expected to be recognized." Judge Thornton studied me. "Does the defense know you're related to the defendant?" "No, Your Honor. We've been estranged for years. Almost no one knows." After a pause, he nodded. "Given the nature of this revelation, I'm calling a 30-minute recess. Counsel both sides in chambers." His gavel came down, and the courtroom exploded into noise. Reporters shouting questions, my parents turning red, court officers hustling Hazel out. But before she disappeared, she looked over her shoulder. Our eyes met, and for the first time in nearly a decade, I saw it. Not hatred, not defiance, uncertainty. Rachel met me outside her phone, buzzing nonstop. "Governor, this is a PR nightmare waiting to happen. We need to issue a statement." "Not yet," I said. "This isn't political, this is personal." When court reconvened, Judge Thornton addressed the room. "What's occurred here today is unprecedented, but this remains a court of law. We will proceed with appropriate decorum." Then turning to me, "Governor Davis has requested to make a statement. Given the extraordinary circumstances, I will allow it." I walked slowly to the witness stand, every step heavy with years of grief. I took the oath. I sat down, and I looked straight at Hazel. "My name is Mackenzie Davis. Yes, I'm the governor of Michigan, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because Hazel Davis is my sister." Murmurs rippled. Flashbulbs sparked, then were quickly shut down by bailiffs. When Hazel was born, I was 11. Our parents were present, but not parenting. They left bottles on the counter and disappeared behind locked doors. I was the one who fed her, bathed her, helped with homework, walked her to school. I took care of her while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, working part-time and applying to scholarships. I paused. When I left for college, it wasn't to escape. It was to build something, a future big enough for both of us. I left money. I called weekly. I made visits. And when I graduated, I had a home ready for her. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. "Your Honor, these are records. Bank statements showing money I sent home. a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment near a good school, documentation that I never stopped trying. The defense attorney's eyes widened. The prosecutor leaned forward, visibly unsettled. I turned back to Hazel. I don't blame you for believing them. They told you a story that made their neglect look like sacrifice, that made my struggle look like selfishness. But I never stopped loving you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Hazel blinked and a single tear fell down her cheek. The judge nodded solemnly. Thank you, Governor Davis. Another recess was called, but this time the defense attorney approached the prosecution. A quiet conversation, a request for time. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. One by one, new witnesses were called. Mrs. Lancaster, our old neighbor, testified about seeing me walking Hazel to school while still in high school myself. Mrs. Bennett, my guidance counselor, described how I'd planned my college path around bringing Hazel with me after graduation. Hazel sat frozen, her expression unreadable. But her parents, our parents, squirmed. They tried to leave during the testimony. Judge Thornton stopped them. You will remain until these proceedings conclude. The lies they'd built for years were unraveling publicly strand by strand. Then came the announcement. The prosecution and defense had reached a plea agreement. The most serious trafficking charges would be dropped. Hazel would plead guilty to possession and fraud, and in exchange would be entered into the state's intensive drug rehabilitation program, followed by probation and supervised community service. Hazel looked stunned. Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. I felt a weight lift from my chest, not because she avoided prison, but because for the first time, truth had cracked through the wall. Judge Thornton addressed her directly. You're being offered a second chance, Miss Davis. I strongly suggest you take it seriously. Then he turned to me. Governor, I trust this program doesn't fall under your office's current oversight. No, Your Honor, I said. It was established under the previous administration. I had no involvement. Very well. The gavel came down again. Court adjourned. Hazel was about to be led away when she turned to her attorney and asked, Can I talk to her? Moments later, we were in a side room, officers present, a plain table between us. She looked across at me, eyes red, hands trembling. Why are you here? She asked softly. Because you're my sister, she scoffed. You could have helped me a long time ago. Used your power, your title. I couldn't manipulate the justice system, and I didn't want you to think this was pity. I'm not here as the governor. I'm here because I never stopped caring. She leaned back. I told people you were my sister. They laughed, said I was delusional. A small, hollow laugh escaped me. Well, I guess you win that argument. She smirked, then fell quiet. Mom and Dad, they lied to me, didn't they? I nodded. They rewrote our history, because it was easier than facing the truth. Hazel looked down at her hands. I don't know what's real anymore. I've been angry for so long. We have time to figure it out, I said gently. If you want. She hesitated, then nodded. I think I'd like that. As she was led away, she turned back one last time. I'm sorry, I said. I never wanted to see you again. Tears slid down my cheeks. I'm just glad it wasn't true. Outside the courtroom, chaos erupted, reporters swarming, headlines already forming. But I didn't care. The only headline I needed was the one Hazel gave me. Hope. 6 months passed. Fall turned to winter. The Michigan sky turned gray, and a hush settled over Lansing, broken only by the flurry of press and politics that never really stopped. The courtroom chaos faded, replaced by a steady rhythm of policy meetings, late nights, and statewide initiatives. But something had shifted. People saw me differently now, not just as the youngest female governor in Michigan's history, but as a sister, a daughter, a person. Some tried to turn the scandal against me. Why didn't she step in sooner, they asked. Where was the governor when her own sister was suffering? But most understood. They reached out. Letters, emails, messages from strangers. I raised my brother, too. Thank you for telling the truth. My family told everyone I was the problem. You helped me believe in my story again. And the one message that meant the most, Hazel, showing up, right on time. Rachel peeked her head in one afternoon. Your 3 o'clock is here. I looked up. Send her in. Hazel entered my office a little hesitant but smiling. She looked different, clear-eyed, healthy. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair tied back in a loose braid. The haunted expression from the courtroom was gone. Still punctual, huh? I said, grinning. 5 minutes early is on time, she replied with mock severity. Thomas keeps drilling it into me. Thomas was the security officer assigned to escort her to our bi-weekly meetings. He'd become something of an unofficial big brother and part-time basketball coach. He's trying to convert me into a Pistons fan, Hazel added, flopping onto the couch. I poured tea, a ritual we'd started during our earliest supervised visits. What began as awkward court-mandated check-ins had become something normal. A fragile but real rhythm. Every other week, either at the governor's mansion or her rehabilitation facility. How was group this week, I asked. Intense, she said, stirring honey into her cup. We did family systems work. I talked about Mom and Dad. That was new. We didn't talk much about our parents. They'd moved to Florida shortly after the trial, apparently unwilling to face the neighbors. According to Aunt Susan, they were still telling everyone Hazel had manipulated the system using my political pull. Have they reached out? I asked. Hazel shook her head. Not directly. Aunt Susan says they're still telling the poor them version, that I ruined their reputation. I sighed. Some people will rewrite the story until the day they die. Hazel took a deep breath. I used to think you were the villain, that you left because you didn't want me, that I was too much. My hands stilled on the teapot. I built my whole identity around being abandoned, she said. It gave me something to blame. It made everything that happened after not my fault. I looked at her gently, and I built mine around believing I failed you. She smiled soft and sad. Turns out we were both wrong, and both kind of right. Her therapist had a name for it, parental alienation. It was real and painful and designed to fracture the bond between us before it ever had a chance to grow back. But I know better, now, Hazel whispered. I know you never stopped loving me. That nearly broke me. We sat in silence for a while, just drinking tea, watching snow fall outside the window. Then she said, I have news. I looked up. The program director says I'm ready for the transition phase. I'll be moving into a halfway house next month. That's amazing, I said sincerely, where I requested Ingham County to stay close. Warmth bloomed in my chest. I can help you find an apartment when you're ready. No pressure. I'd like that, she said. We talked about other things, a book she was reading, a bill I was working on, a funny story from her therapy group. When our meeting ended, I walked her to the door. Next week at Lakeside, I asked, referring to her facility. Yep. Oh, wait. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. I made this in occupational therapy. It's not much. I opened it carefully. Inside was a clay picture frame glazed in uneven blue. It held a photo of the two of us from nearly 20 years ago. Hazel was 5. I was 16, both of us smiling at the lake, the last summer before things started to crumble. I kept this, she said. One of the few photos I didn't throw away. My throat tightened. I have the same one. It's on my desk at home. Has been for years. Really. Especially when we weren't speaking. We hugged. Still a little awkward, still a little stiff, but real. As she left with Thomas, I placed the photo next to my monitor where I could see it while I worked. That night, I made a decision. Rachel, I said, calling my chief of staff, I want to move forward with the Young Caregivers Initiative. Let's formalize it. What should we call it? I paused, thinking, then smiled. The Bridge Program, because it would be the structure we never had. The one that connects love to responsibility, sacrifice to support, children to their future. We launched the program quietly, no fanfare, just impact. It offered counseling, education assistance, respite care, financial aid, all the things I needed as a child, raising a child. It became my administration's signature policy and eventually a model adopted by other states. At the small press event, Hazel stood in the back, out of sight, watching with a small, proud smile. As I closed my speech, our eyes met across the room. Her nod said everything. We weren't healed. Not completely. Some years were too broken to retrieve. But we were trying, and that mattered. Because the truth is, some bonds don't need to be perfect to be powerful. They just need to be real.